listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Recovery Advocate Network's Coffee and Conversation. I'm your host, Ange, and today we have with us author Jane Manning, who wrote the book Trauma Can Kiss My Ass, a poetic memoir. Jane is a 2004 Magnum Cum Laude graduate who was voted by her peers to be most likely to be CEO. 20 years later, Jane wrote and published her first book that takes you and me through an emotional expedition through Jane's personal story of domestic abuse, suicidal ideation, self-harm, and lots of healing. Jane's poetic memoir is a unique compilation of short stories, journal entries, and letters to a younger self, allowing readers to experience her private struggles in overcoming all odds and healing with the transformative power of therapy in real time. I very much related to so many of the stories and struggles that Jane had. I think you will as well. Okay, so now we're about to get started. Let's remember our 3 C's and our rules of engagement. That first C, well, of course, it is click. Click the love, like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is in the type of media that you're watching or listening to the podcast. It really makes a difference because when you do this, it helps other people find this podcast. You never know who needs to hear these messages. So do that today. Also, click to go to our website and click that donate button. Please remember that one of the biggest reasons for this podcast is to be able to provide those bridge grants to individuals who need the financial funding to be able to resume their recovery therapy. So remember, click on the website and the donate button. Okay, the second C, that is commit. Commit to staying for the full episode. Read, listen, follow. Find out what Jane's favorite motivational quote is. It's very powerful. You will want to know. And then the final C, well, of course, we say it's your coffee, but we know I always drink Coke Zero. So it's your coffee, your Coke Zero, your tea, your water, whatever. Really, it's the conversation. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Okay, listeners, I'm very excited to have Jane here. I'm going to let Jane introduce herself in just a minute. But Jane, you and I have gone back and forth about recording this episode for, I think 6 to 8 months at least. And so I'm excited. Actually, in that realm of where people say things and timing happen for a reason, I will share something with the listeners and I'll share something with you in keeping with that theme. We're going to talk about Jane's book, which is Trauma Can Kiss My Ass. And as listeners know, I read every book and I tag it with different things. And what I think is interesting is we're actually recording this on Friday, August 23rd. And it is actually my listeners know I had a very traumatic childhood. I shared that with you, Jane, in our messages back and forth. And today is actually the day that my father, who was one of my abusers in one way, is buried today. Or not buried, he was cremated. His service was today at 2:00, just a couple hours ago. And so I think in covering some of the notes that I made and some of the thoughts that I made and one of the comments that I made to you back and forth in our emails
really tied to some sensitivities around this book. And so I'm thinking, wow, I think it's appropriate that today was a day we were just meant to chat about this topic. There are so many great things that you highlight in here that I think so many people just have so many misconceptions about. And I love that you are so brave and bold to talk about them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to classic just and shut up. People hear you talk all the time.
Well, first of all,
Jane, why don't you start by introducing yourself and tell us why you're here today?
For a tough day, but also a day that brings closure for you in a lot of ways that I'm sure, able to put some Band-Aid, move things on. So this book for me came about after the end of a very, very difficult relationship, and I was going through a bit of extreme appreciation and very deep therapy. Writing is something that part of my life since childhood. My mother journaled. We have some of my grandmother's journals. It's just been something that's always been a part of my life, but there was something consider doing it this time. But after that relationship, it became a very important part of my therapy, because things that I would write about with my therapist that I could not talk about. And by using these short writing sessions with her, I was able to process things in writing and then share them with her, and then go through the process of talking about it and getting through those layered subjects. And a lot of the ideas that are discussed in this book, a lot of the resources that are included in this book, came out on a broader level. Sorry, my dog is trying to get on my lap. She senses my anxiety. My therapist, my therapist was able to
she's doing her job.
Resources to be based on those topics in my writing.
So I include in the intro, and so for all the listeners who skipped the intro, I don't know who you are, but you're guilty. You know who you are yourself. If you skip the intro, the book does cover sensitive topics such as domestic abuse, self-harm, and some other topics. So if these are triggering or sensitive to you, we do always encourage that you listen to the episode with someone who's close to you and that you find resources that are beneficial to you. So I find that interesting. I was thinking the same thing when I was reading your book, and when I've talked to some of my close family members who I actually consider to be close family members, and they've said for well over 20 years, when are you going to write a book? And I was looking at yours and I was thinking your book is, gosh, at least 30 something years in the making, because you include different things from high school, at least maybe before high school, from your journal. And I was quite envious, because I thought, geez, and if you would just like suck it up and do what the therapists say, which is journal, which is so healthy, then you would have all of this stuff written up. So first off, kudos to you. But secondly, can you tell us a little bit? We've talked in the podcast in several episodes about the benefit of journaling. I know at least Joshua in his episode, we did 3 episodes with Joshua Young on his books in recovery, and we talked about journaling and the art of journaling. And I know we had a blog post also about journaling on the podcast. And so there's so much science about the therapeutic power of journaling. So I would love, though, first, why don't this is an easy, we'll ease in with the power of journaling. Okay. So you started very young and you wrote in your journal through different phases of various types of trauma through your childhood and just different instances. And then,
There's
and you used it in your
so much
travels. So
more.
first off, so jealous about your 10-month expedition around the world. And then your therapist used in that. So can you maybe, oh, it's so much more. Okay. We're going to talk about all of this. And, but I think this is what I'm wondering, Jane, is that can you tell me a little bit about when your therapist brought up the idea of journaling? Was that a significant different type of journal? Like, did you have any anxiety to that type of journaling versus when you were just writing in your journal as a young person or young individual? Like, was there something different and more impactful when your therapist said, I want you to start this type of journaling, or and maybe it was the exact
Was
same.
not
Can you kind of walk through
because
that type of
it was something I
emotion
was
and that
already
type of
doing,
feeling?
and actually, in my scenario, something I brought to her, because I was doing the journaling at home and then coming to the session and just staring at the walls. And so I was not, there was that block. And I realized it's not that I'm not capable of talking about it. It's the style of communication that's my problem. And by volunteering to let her read my writings and then us do writing things together, it really broke sense of communication, broke the wall of communication.
How did that feel the first time you allowed her to read your writings? I know I have, as I mentioned, started writing my book, and I do have it published online anonymously, such as yours is also anonymously. And a few people know the secret website. And I remember and they will post comments when I post something. I haven't posted anything mostly since I started this podcast. But when they first read the first couple of things, I don't know. I was so anxious. I just felt like I have no fear of public speaking at all. I have no fear of doing a podcast. I have no fear of that. But those first few times I posted something and someone was reading it, I really felt like I was standing naked in like the middle of some, I don't know, baseball field, and people were staring at me, making fun of me. I just felt so overwhelmed by being exposed in fear.
Mythical idea of people serving, you should do this, you should write a book, like you said your family has always done, to okay, if I'm going to write a book, we're going to do it my way or not. Which I'm sure I'm not the only person listening to this that has said that as well. There were a few things that were important to me to post me and be. So wanted to make sure I didn't let my boundaries and let my personality out of. And one of those things is the fact that it is completely not in standard paragraph format. It's not standard chapter format, nor is it in any coherent chronological timeline. And I wouldn't say coherent, but because the story makes sense as you're a reader, but it's not necessarily in chronological order. Because the pieces are what makes sense in my brain. And I needed flexibility from Go ahead.
I realized that as I was reading it, because there are certain parts. No, I realized that as I was reading it, because there were certain parts, then I got to another part, and I suddenly thought, oh, okay, now that piece earlier makes sense, right? Which I loved the diversity. And so listeners, when you read the book, you'll see this, and it is nice to have a variety of a book to read, right? It gives a different flavor and a different texture. And I will tell you, listeners, you don't like skip through something because you're seeing different words and thinking, okay, because then you're gonna miss little snippets that are really, really, really powerful, that you suddenly pause and you have to highlight this. Like, here is a powerful little phrase. I'll highlight some of those a little bit later in the podcast. So, but I appreciate that, because then later on in the book, it was almost kind of like a mystery too, to say, oh, okay, now that makes sense earlier.
So, as a reader, as someone who had come through the journey and come out the other side on a positive note, I didn't want it to feel like you were reading through it that everything was the whole time, because that's not living it the whole time. So I want you to have that role, be able to laugh and be able to feel the highs and lows, and not just feel like life is terrible time, because that's not the point.
Okay, so you asked me earlier today, it totally does. So you asked me earlier today which stories I wanted to highlight, and I am torn, because I am a human being, and I could highlight the stories that I relate to, because as we've talked about, I have similar traumas. And while I say similar, I relate to the domestic abuse scenarios. I relate to the PTSD scenarios. So we definitely have to talk about those scenarios, because, those I very much relate to. But I am passionate about, on this podcast, really making sure that your voice is heard. And I think this is an opportunity also. You shared in the book different things that you really want to make sure that, well, I think you've shared your story, but I would love for you to have an opportunity to really share some things that you think are really important for the world to understand. Maybe it is about, I think a lot of people have misunderstandings about self-harm, for example. I also had periods of my life where I had self-harm, and I know people misunderstand why people would self-harm. Or there may be some other things. So I really would like to start with, what are some stories or some instances in the book, Jane, that are really impactful for you, that you want to make sure we cover first?
One of the things that I'd like to turn to is, you mentioned the black sheep previously, which is on page 17, and that really is introduction to the old man, which is the following chapter. That was going to be what I wanted to point as the story that I focused on. And so really the black sheep is the introduction to the stuff out of hand in hand. And I feel really the black sheep, and this really focused definition that the whole holistic psychologist put together. I'm not taking credit for her work. I'm using resources that has been provided. She talks about how when that person has the anxiety, that person who has the trauma has been called out in the family, they often then become isolated with the family and seek out another situation to belong. And that's what happened with me. My situation with the old man. And my family didn't understand what was happening. I'm sorry.
Can I read
absolutely.
that part?
I would love that. Yes.
Can I read that part really quick? Can I read that part in the book really quick? Yeah, so I was telling Jane earlier today that I really resonated with the black sheep part, much of which is that I've been called the black sheep in my family as well. And someone once told me that, have you ever considered maybe that you're the white sheep who is raised in a family of black sheep, which I thought was really powerful because I never understood it. I was the person who was really passionate about making the world a better place. But I loved this. And as Jane mentioned, this comes from the holistic psychologist. So it's a resource provided by that. And it says, the black sheep is labeled the most difficult person in the family. So the black sheep is usually, and I had my glasses here. I left them. Okay. The black sheep is usually called too sensitive, dramatic, or weird, made fun of or mocked often, someone who felt alone or disconnected growing up, interested and curious in things their family is not, aware of the family dysfunction, treated differently than siblings. Families that don't want to address deeper issues will subconsciously project those issues onto the black sheep. As a black sheep gets older, they might feel confused about who they actually are and if they are actually belong. They might feel isolated and alone. This can be very painful. This can be a very painful experience. After this period, the black sheep wakes up. They're usually drawn to healing, deeper meaning in life, and creativity. They begin to rebuild their lives and learn who they actually are. The black sheep is meant to thrive because they're more aware. They usually become the cycle breaker of the family, no longer accepting dysfunction and self-betrayal. They start to take care of themselves and their own needs. They want a life of integrity, and they're willing to accept that not everyone will understand them, something they've been used to since childhood. The black sheep was always meant to thrive. They were never difficult. They just had needs that went unmet. Let this be your validation to keep going, even when you're misunderstood.
Sharing that. I appreciate it. This really resonates with me because I feel like I personally experienced both sides of this, both with my experience with the old man and with coming out of that and going on my trip overseas and really deep diving into the culture, spending a lot of time traveling around the world and trying to find who I was. Fortunately, what I also experienced when I came back to the States was repetition cycle. I right back into that, but I didn't have a healthy plan stable when I came back to the States. And me going through again, another negative male situation to be healthy. And the reason I'm doing this, sorry, I laugh through the bad stuff. I wanted to put this book to provide as many resources as possible so that I only have to do it once. So the page I would like to Go ahead. It is very
However,
common.
it is very common. I just wanted to highlight really quick. It is very common. And a lot of people, myself, and I'm not going to speak for you, but I might suspect that you also felt this way.
Yeah.
A lot of us feel really guilty when we repeat this cycle in our lives. I know I felt very guilty when I would continuously fall for a particular type of a man, trying to feel. I was always looking for someone that met some needs I did not get from my father. And so I would look for these types of things repeatedly, 4 times, 4 marriages, 4 divorces. And then I would blame myself, and then I would have shame, guilt, regret. And then I felt like people were saying, well, it's obviously her because she's the common thing. Why does she keep going to these unhealthy relationships and that kind of stuff? So it's very, very, very common. There's so much research on it that's so common. So if you're listening to this episode and you're in a situation like this, or you have one, if you've been in a situation like this and you're blaming yourself for it, I just want you to know it is very common, and definitely work through your therapist on it and find some healthy ways to break the cycle. And if you're in a situation like this and you're not leaving because you're blaming yourself
You
for
can
it,
say
like,
that
now is the
as
time to
many
get
times
hope
as
because you deserve so much
I
better. Okay,
appreciate
back to you,
it.
Jane.
I thank you. And there are only 2 of the 3 highlighted in the book. One got left out just with, he wasn't bad enough to make it into the book. Isn't that terrible? So there's so I wanted to turn to page 27 of the paperback. That's the copy you have, right? Okay, I just want to make sure we're referencing the same version. And
That's what I have. It's 20. Yeah.
I'm actually going to start on 26 and I'm going to read in 27. So this was my first relationship in college. First guy I started dating when I went off to college. My parents are concerned. They don't like the age difference. They think I've continued to change, moving into someone new. But you know what? The old man lived right next to a university, literally the same neighborhood. He could get anything if he wanted, if all he wanted a piece of ass. But he's choosing me. Clearly, he cares. Clearly, it's more than anything physical. The old man, his friends love to call him the ultimate bachelor, making sure I know, pain to the untamable, how out of character this is for him. Should I be flattered or scared? He's never given me reason not to trust him. However, it is a bit odd. Everyone seems to think womanizer, that he would never sit down or long distance. Am I just naive? Was mentioned in one of the previous pages. I just started at a random spot with it away from each other. Universities for nonsense. So that was just a sample I wanted to read from you of actually directly from my journal in college of how naive I was.
You know what I found interesting when I was reading this part, because how naive we are, right? So my third marriage was similar to this one that you had, Jane, where I decided that what I needed for that marriage, I needed a godly man. It was a much older man. And he convinced me to get married really quickly. And he did not have a job, and he moved into my house. Thankfully, I did not have the situation where his name was on the mortgage. It was just my name on the mortgage. But as soon as I moved in, it was very clear he wanted me to pay his ex-wife's child support so he could get visitation back and all of this stuff, and very much manipulated. And thankfully, after 2 years, I kicked him out and got rid of him. But it was when I was reading this, and of course, when you're an outsider, you're reading it, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, Jane, no, don't move to Florida. No, Jane,
Yes.
don't sign. Don't buy the house. Don't sign on the mortgage. He's tricking you, right? And here's the reality: is that this is life, and I'm reading this, and I know for a fact, if I was, and listeners, Jane was salutatorian of her high school class, right? And graduated with summa cum laude, I think, from your university. And so a very intelligent woman like myself. And I know I totally would have moved to Florida. I absolutely would have fallen for buying the house. I would have done that. Why? Because individuals who grow up with certain types of abuse want to believe that someone is going to love them in this way, want to believe these things, that they will fall into these types of abuse. And it's the gift that trauma gives you that you then live through.
I hope readers get it, and hope readers get from the style that I shared it and the nakedness of how I shared it, is that, this isn't me creating a novel saying I was being naive. This is journal. This is exactly what I wrote when I was 18, and what you're thinking today, what you're debating about today, is exactly the same thing. And I'm not trying to parent you. I'm not trying to tell you I know better. I'm just trying to say, like, just read my journal. And also in the very back, I've provided resources that really changed my life. Most importantly, cognitive distortions and the setting boundaries, like how to politely, professionally, and clearly boundaries. Learning how to say, learning how to have a day off, learning how to just have simple and clear boundaries, and that being okay. That's really hard for a people pleaser, for someone who's never allowed to know, or just allowed to have a choice. One of the stories that isn't in the book, but is kind of a legacy in my family. I did it in the book because I knew it would offend family, because it's such a truthful story in my family. But hot dogs, I don't eat hot dogs. I never have. But my family was always taught that you don't say no. You're not allowed to say no. If you go over to someone's house and they offer you something, you eat. So I'm a pro at eating hot dog buns with. So I knew that I wasn't eating a hot dog. Entire childhood, every birthday party, every school day that we had hot dogs. 18 years, hot dog buns with ketchup. I can fool anyone.
Wow. That actually, I love that last statement that you made, Jane, is being able to fool anyone in that instance, because you do end up becoming really good at doing that. And that is a skill that is very common amongst individuals that have varying types of abuse. Now, you highlight in the next big section of, so you talk about the old man and that type of trying to fit into a relationship or trying to find love in a unique type of relationship. And it is interesting, right? Because he really
Yes.
tries to captivate you and make you love him. And now you find out like how he afforded all of those trips because he was ruining his credit, right? And then you see that, then you talk about gaslighting. Yeah. And then you talk about gaslighting, which is also, a very common thing. And I think of all of the ways that perpetual individuals then continue, like the ones that I know and the people that I've met through. And, a big part of listeners, a big part of this podcast is reducing the stigma, but also educating society about different things. So if you get nothing else from this episode, I really want individuals to take a step back. And when you hear a story about someone struggling with something, I really would love for you to pause on the judgment of it. Because what I often see is I see someone and they hear a story of, let's just say, a woman who's in this situation, and they say, well, why didn't she leave? Or why didn't they do this? Or she just keeps picking the wrong person. If she just picked the right person, or wait, everyone else, in my situation, like here's today, this funeral, the obituary came out on my birthday. It was really nice. It listed me as the last of the living relatives. I was after all the nieces and nephews, and then it said, oh, by the way, a daughter, Angela. I was right before all the dead people, though. So that was really cool, right? And I think people will see that and they make judgments like, what is wrong? I also kind of think, okay, someone clearly has issues that wrote that, right? But people would see that, right, and judge, okay, what's wrong with her? The rest of the family is there. The rest of the family must be fine. It must be something wrong with her. And what I would like is listeners, I would like you to buy the book and read it and pause and think. And if you do anything else in life, when you hear about challenges that individuals are having, look at the individual as a human being and have less judgment on what you think that on the decisions that they're making, and have more kindness, more sitting there willing to just be patient and show love. Because you really just, even though I could say to Jane what I did not say to her, so we're going to talk about the times that you escaped. I want to talk about that. And even when I was saying to Jane earlier about that, I wanted to talk about that, I did not say, I know what you were going through because I was kidnapped and held hostage. I don't know what Jane was going through. And I cringed when I heard about your broken hand. When I was reading about your broken hand, I was just like, oh my God, I don't think I could do that. But I didn't say I knew what she was going through because I didn't. Our stories are different. So I think if you take anything from this, just know that you never know the whole story. And you don't have to tell them, you don't have to side with anyone. You don't have to side with me. You don't have to side with Jane. You just pause for a moment and listen to the story and show compassion and love. I think that's really what much of this is. So, okay, Jane. So should we talk about gaslighting? Should we talk about your hand? And how on earth did you open the door? Which part should we talk about next?
One of the reasons I really wanted to include this is to truly and properly define it. I feel like it's become a catchword sometimes, and things that are gaslighting aren't called out, and things that aren't gaslighting are just called in. Yes, we need to properly educate and reference and call it out. We see it, but we also don't just to use it inappropriate. I don't.
So should we read it? So what you put in here for gaslighting is,
Mhm.
and it is based, so it's provided by Let's Talk Mental Health. So that's what you referenced. And it is for each of the letters. I don't remember what you call it when you do something for
No,
each
I
letter.
was
But
saying,
anyway,
I think it's
okay.
called an
So
anagram.
what is gaslighting?
You're right.
So it's gradual distortion of truth. You want to read it? There you go, an anagram. Thank you. Thank you. Love it. Okay. Okay. So gradual distortion of truth, avoiding responsibility, shifting blame. S for sowing seeds of doubt in your mind. L for lying and manipulating facts. I, invalidating your feelings and experiences, which is a huge one for me. Getting you to question your sanity. H, hiding their true intentions. Twisting reality to suit their narrative. I, insisting you're overly sensitive. N, neglecting your emotions and well-being. And the reality is this: gaslighting is emotional abuse. And I think, to me, that's clear. So when I talk about the different individuals in my childhood who gave different levels of abuse, my abuse from my father was emotional abuse and severe neglect. So, and from my mother was severe physical abuse and sexual abuse by my brother. But I think a lot of, now I'm very grateful we're in 2024. Individuals really understand how severe emotional abuse is and how impactful it is on human beings. Whereas I think, 30, 40 years ago, oh gosh, maybe 10 years ago, people didn't really understand how impactful gaslighting and emotional abuse and that type of stuff is on the human psyche and on society in general.
Terms, even in a same relationship, because you can have that same partner creating this, storm of doubt and changing clocks or, doing more things at the same time to really make you question what's happening.
Without a doubt.
You mentioned
So I was pulling up some of the, one of the quotes. So one of the things, how I was mentioning, listening to or reading all the different quotes and like not quotes, but you do have a lot of quotes in here, and I love quotes. But when you're talking about, and you do like your travel checklist and you're talking about traveling, one of the things that I love when you're talking about the 10 months away is on page 154 in your paperback, where just these two lines where you just say, live for yourself, for no one else. I absolutely love that. I actually did not really start living for myself and no one else until I was in my early 40s. I lived before my early 40s. I very much lived trying to make other people proud of me before that. And it wasn't until my early 40s where I was suddenly like, wait, I want to live my own life. And it's so powerful.
there are definitely
to have that moment. And I love that you put that in there.
Catch yourself and remind yourself, no, that's not what I'm here to do. But was this moment coming back really from being overseas that was the first time I realized that truly I don't care what I look like, what anyone thinks about me. Sorry, but if I smell, if my hair's sticking up, I could completely be free and be myself. And I would go days without looking in the mirror, and I had a backpack that I lived out for 10 months, and it had maybe 10 days worth of clothing, and I had it for 10 months, and it was the best experience ever. I wouldn't have everything. I'm mad that I got sick and had to come home. But it really took that experience for me to say, I don't care. I really don't care.
So what was how did that come about? Okay, because I know a lot of people would have this dream. I've always had a dream of taking 6 to 10 months off and backpacking across the world. I looked at the list of the things that you listed in the book. The only thing that I've done is the Mount Everest. I have had coffee at the base of Mount Everest. I have hiked in Tibet. I did it from Tibet, not from I think you did the Nepal side. But okay, so what happened? What led up to this? And first and secondly, doing it by yourself, which is unbelievable, right? So what is it that occurred that led you to be brave enough to go out on your own to do this trip?
But I did sign up to go with a small group of people. But the people that I was with changed every couple of weeks, or it fluctuated. I never really knew who I was with. That changed frequently, but I was somewhat coordinated-ish. I it was after the old man, and I was having a terrible time at work and knew that I needed a significant change, and just decided that I would cash out what retirement I had and spent my savings. There was an opportunity to fundraising and try to, advertise and get people to make donations, but the guy didn't feel comfortable with that. Like, come give me money so I can go travel the world. That didn't sit right with me. So I just everything myself, and it was great. We did. Yes.
Okay, so since everything in your book is not in chronological order, this is after the old
Correct.
man, after the house has been foreclosed on, you're working, you take the time off to do this. This is after the accident, and you find out your parents are going to be okay. And then you come back, and what happens next?
Yes. And so when I come back, sorry. I initially have I'm single for a while. I'm working. I'm in Florida. And my first relationship, that is the one who's not in the book. I joked that he wasn't bad enough to make the book, but he broke my heart. I would say it was he the real love that didn't work out. There's has to be one of those. I've always said I wanted to explore the concept of the three, where there's this idea of, but I don't know that it's really if I have ideas about it, but yeah, he got away. And the next day was the terrible. And we just called the guy or him or no names involved. This is why I write, because I don't talk well.
You're great. So I have a question, because I almost forgot to ask this question, but I was just flipping through my notes.
The Jeep that
Okay, I have to
was
ask the Jeep question. What kind of Jeep was it?
Renegade.
Like, was it a Wrangler? Was it a
the one?
No, the Jeep that. Well, okay. Only because I'm a Jeep girl and I have Rubicon, and I was like reading through as you're. Not the one that caught fire. The one. So I want to hear the story. I want to hear, and it's tied to the Jeep. I want to hear the story of what I would call the family of good Samaritans who went above and beyond. Because I think also, as growing up and not being able to trust people. Yeah, having people that would go out of their way to do that is so mind blowing. So first off, I want to know what kind of Jeep that Jeep was.
So bad.
And tell me about that story.
Story that I was imagining, parents, and was terrified of these people, but I was completely terrified of them. And I just had to allow.
Yeah.
So I was in a Jeep Renegade. I previously have a Wrangler, but at this point I had a Renegade. The Renegade with the fire is the same Renegade that laid out fire. And that's what's so funny about the whole tire swapperoo thing. I do have a picture of our cars sitting next to each other with all the tires off. Told me I couldn't put it in the book. Not as family, but so I should put it on the website or something. But so yeah, I was towing a camper and I got a flat tire, pulled off. I was all ready to be capable woman and changed the tire and camper all by myself, except the flat tire wasn't on the camper Jeep. So I had to unhitch to do the tire on the Jeep. But then there is no tire on the Jeep. There actually isn't a spare tire on the Jeep. So the family who lives next door, and let me say, when I clarify where I'm at, I am in the backwoods, Central Florida. I mean, Central Georgia. Like, you need to somehow play the album song overlay on this. Backwoods, Alabama. There's just no way to describe how backwoods this area is. It's just field, forever. And I would have called a tow truck. They would have only been able to tow my car, not my camper. And if I would have spent the night, I would have had to stay in my camper, still not gotten my car fixed. So this is one of the funny stories I included in the book, so you can see a basket case. But this little family that lives in a farmhouse, bottling up grandpa with his overalls and his grandson, they offered to help. They checked every vehicle on their farm property. No less than like 12 vehicles, tractors, jeeps, cars, rusted out. Cars that have been there for a really long time. But they took every single car, checked it to see if it would fit. And then their youngest daughter finally showed up, and she had a Jeep credit card. We swapped all four because our rims were different colors. So I couldn't have 3 silver rims
because
one black rim,
hers were black rims.
3 black rims, 1 silver rim. So she gave me all tires. And who are these people? Yes, these are good Samaritans. That's
Really, really amazing human beings. Yeah. I love that story. I have to say, I think I'm a good human, and I'm not sure I would do that. I don't know. So if they're ever listening to this podcast, you guys absolutely rock and are amazing.
yes, yeah.
Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, we talked a little bit about at the very beginning of this podcast about the self-harm thing, and about really want to talk about what a lot of society doesn't understand self-harm, that sometimes individuals, when they're in severe internal emotional pain, and sometimes they feel very numb, and self-harm is a way to feel something, and a way to just like not explode, but to like exert this. Okay. And so you talk about the self-harm, you then talk about calling one of the crisis lines, and they walk you through, and you're able to go to sleep, and they don't do. Then you call your psychiatrist the next day for medication, and the psychiatrist is the one that does the welfare check, and then does the Baker's Act and has you go inpatient. So I want to hear a little bit about that story, and about also what your experience was with the Baker's Act and the inpatient treatment, because everyone's a little different. And I think when I talk to people about how that experience is, a lot of society doesn't really understand how that can play out. So whatever you're willing and interested in sharing, if you want to talk about that.
I really needed and enjoyed my time inpatient. And I know enjoyed is an odd word to use, but where I needed to be, and I knew that. And I think that's really what I'm kind of trying to get to with the person on the phone, like trying to find out, like, there's somewhere I can take myself, and you have some, and I don't think there was really, we were communicating effectively the seriousness of how I was feeling, and that was not her fault. That was still me being afraid of saying those words to anyone, but also me knowing that's what I needed. And that's why it took a few days. But like you said, so many people are concerned or confused by self-harm, because as soon as my mother heard, she thought I had tried suicide. never on my mind. It was completely exactly as you described, of a self-harm, self-soothing outlet for pain and for emotion and everything I was dealing with. Like, I just needed it to go somewhere. And it became that outlet. And by going inpatient, they were able to alter medication and provide the additional resources that I needed, that I only see a psychiatrist monthly. I wasn't able to communicate effectively to him how badly I needed to make those alterations.
How long were you inpatient?
I went in Tuesday. They gave me the opportunity home Friday, and I requested to stay until Monday. So 7 days.
I'm so glad to hear you had a great experience. And I think that's the type of experience that we hope individuals will have. It's not always the case. But I'm really glad that it was the experience that you needed. And unfortunately, not all treatment centers are created equal. That is, part of our mission, a third of the mission is raising funds to help individuals who are in treatment whose insurance drops them, to help bridge the time, to provide bridge grants. And part of it, of our end, is also determining what centers we're going to collaborate with, because it's really important to us to collaborate with centers that are really setting up individuals for success, because we've seen a diverse types of types of centers and what they focus on and that type of stuff. So I'm really grateful that you received that and you were able to get that. So, okay. So the last thing in our time that I'm super curious about, and then I want to make sure we haven't missed something that you're passionate about. I want to talk about the PTSD piece of it. And the reason I want to talk about it is, obviously, I struggle with severe PTSD from my kidnapping, and I'm hoping I can find it really quickly, where you highlight the feelings of, okay, yep, I found it. Okay, so it's in the book, in the paperback book, around 202 and 203, and it's when you're talking about cicadas, and really thinking about things like noise. Yeah, thinking about things about noise and stuff like that. So being, a victim of kidnapping, what people don't understand are the different things that are still triggers to me. And so one of the things that I loved on page 203, where you're just talking about how noise plays such a significant role, and you say knowing the triggers are huge. So for me, I'm COO of a software company, and for example, one of these really stood out to me because we're in a tight office and people are loud and people clap and people make loud noises, okay, that I have to learn to work through. And so some you list here: sudden loud bangs, anything like an explosion, and I assume that relates to the explosion of your Jeep. And then shouting, arguing, or a dominant man's voice. Totally, I struggle with that every day when I'm in the office, from the man's voice in my kidnapping, and then and from my childhood, and repeating consistent sounds, beeping, looping jingles, and buzzing alarms. And so I love that you included these, and then you say, let me be clear, there are plenty more, such as a sudden surprise, scare from behind, a large crowd, strangers, sweaty, touching, a sea of people everywhere, small spaces, restraints with no way to escape, the smell of fire, the very specific smell that is burning rubber, gasoline at the same time. And let's see. And so then you talk about staying healthy and avoiding triggers. It isn't easy, sometimes unavoidable. They find you like a snake in the grass. And so then you talk about what your refuge is. But can you talk about how you're navigating through these? I know for me, it's now been August 20th was 4 years since I escaped from the kidnapping. And I am getting better and better every day and learning to ground myself and breathe through these types of things. And I have a service dog that goes with me in certain areas because I can't travel without one. I can't stay in a hotel without a service dog. But there are a lot of things I'm starting to get better at through some of these skills. What are some of the things? I know the dog park is really special for you, but what are some of the ways that you're using to walk through these? And then also, what are some of the things that you're doing to just give yourself grace? Like, I'm not going to apologize that I'm still shaken up when I hear a super loud sound. And I'm absolutely here. I will tell one funny story and then I'm going to shut up. I'm not going to apologize by the fact that I cannot sit with my back to the door in a restaurant. And actually, the funny story is recently we had a work dinner and I was the last to arrive. And my CEO and one other employee were the two sitting in one of the spots I needed to sit in. So my back wasn't to the door. And so I like walk in. And so I look at the two of them and I'm like, okay, one of you, I need to swap with one of you. And so the CEO, he's like, oh, I'm sorry. He gets up and moves and I sit down. And one of my employees, he's just joking. He's like, wow, Angela, that was a power move, making the CEO move so you could sit there. And it just became a joke. But I'm not going to apologize by the fact I can't sit with my back to the door. But it was super sweet and cute. So those are some things I'm not going to apologize for. But other things I am learning to go through. So tell me what your experience has been in those areas.
Unfortunately, has lost the ability to work. She was a full service dog, but had to have surgery on her ear, so she can no longer fly. So we've kind of words, and I'm struggling with not being able to use her at full capacity anymore. But that's a problem. But I think really knowing what scenarios not to put myself in. I don't go to concerts anymore. If I want to loud music, go to a small restaurant that has a guy playing an acoustic guitar. That's enough for me. Making those small adjustments. Where my parents live is a very rural area, and my entire life I've grown up to the sound of echoing gunfire. That is very uncomfortable for me now. I deal with that. And so almost nonstop when I'm at my parents, I have on headphones, and my family's aware of that. My parents also that there are no more fireplace when I'm home. I don't care what you think or what you want. When I'm home, you don't have a fire in the fireplace. There's just little adjustments that I have to make, and I need to respect. And these are not hot buns with Jeff. These are boundaries that are prevent me from coming to your house.
I love that boundary. We did an episode on boundaries earlier in the podcast, and Cloud and Townsend's book, Boundaries, is one of my favorite books. And I love in it where they say no is a complete sentence. And that is so true. It is. It's taking care of yourself. So, okay, Jane, is there anything you really hoped we would cover today that we haven't covered? And then secondly, I absolutely want to make sure we get your favorite motivational quote. So those are the two things I want to make sure we do.
I guess I really would like to include Ruby Cars. It's on the very inside cover. And it says, the greatest lesson a woman should learn. Since day one, she already had it with herself. Convinced her she did not. And here you are, living despite it all. And really, the second thing, I love it. This may be really wall and out of nowhere, but it's kind of where my heart was. I was designing the book. I just kind of wanted you for that. I could go through my bookshelf and pull 100 books off the shelf, and so many of them look the same, and most of them look like this on the inside. And when you're dealing with crap and stress and trauma, hard enough for the world to be pretty. Hard for anything pretty. So I wanted, if nothing else, for the pages that you're staring at to be pretty. So the entire book page is in full. So I don't know if you can see that, but it was really important to my heart that while you read it, that your eyes at least like have a moment of the world is pretty. That you have that escape of, and then that momentary joy of just looking at something pretty. And I hope that makes sense. And I hope you understand that. And I hope that gets you some toy.
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. And I did notice that when I was reading it, that all of the pages had beautiful flowers and a hint of color, and they are beautiful. Well, Jane, this has been wonderful. I love the book.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I'm just
I really
grateful to have had the opportunity to talk with you today. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today with your coffee and conversation. We hope you've been encouraged and learned something from today's story. To learn more about today's guest, please check out our show notes for more details. Now it's time to remember to like this episode, subscribe, and turn on your notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. Recovery Advocate Network envisions a world where individuals with mental health challenges receive comprehensive and effective treatment without the worry of financial burdens to themselves or their families, all without the stigmas often present in society. We are proud that every individual worked with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by making a financial donation via PayPal or Venmo, or email donate@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org if you would like to donate items for our next fundraising auction. Please visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org to learn more. Now, stay in the loop about upcoming events, future episodes, and more by following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, TikTok, LinkedIn, and all major podcast platforms. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. How do you do that? Visit our website at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org
And in the top right corner, click that comment button and comment. So listeners, what do you need to do? Pause what you're doing, subscribe, follow us. Please give us a like and a 5-star rating, write some meaningful comments, and most importantly, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose heart you will touch, so please be a part of a reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're in the U.S. and need additional resources such as shelter, support group resources, transportation, food, and/or a safe, confidential path out of physical or emotional domestic abuse, please call 211 or visit www.211info.org for assistance. Now, we know you are very busy, and we are grateful that you said yes to sharing time with us today. If you stuck to our 3 C's of engagement and listened to the full episode, then visit the podcast section of our website and leave the comment about the podcast, and you'll be entered to win an autographed copy of one of the books from one of our book club series, as well as a Coffee and Conversation coffee mug. So thanks again. Until next time, back to your coffee.